All right, you're welcome back to the Football Show. I'm delighted to be joined on the line by French football writer Philippe Auclair. Good evening, Philippe.
Good evening to you.
So the world of football never stops. No sooner has Euro 2020 come to a close and we're involved in transfer negotiations, and that is going to dominate the next month, all that nonsense. And, French players are going to be very involved, and French clubs are going to be very involved with the financial crisis that is engulfing the French game. We might get onto that in a moment, but just to put a wrap on Euro 2020, because a lot has happened since we last spoke. We have covered in depth the scenes, the horrific and shocking scenes at Wembley from Sunday night, and the more you read, the more you realise it could have been a hell of a lot worse, and that they were incredibly fortunate that there weren't serious injuries, that far worse didn't happen. What has been the view in France of what happened at Wembley? Because, listen, we were there 5 years ago at the Stade de France, and I was trying to think back to that evening, and was there crowds gathering around the Stade de France? And I think all I could remember was a wall of security getting through around 3 different walls of security to get in and around the stadium complex.
I can also remember people at the final in the Stade de France, the French supporters staying for the distribution of medals and clapping off the Portuguese players, which certainly didn't happen this time in terms of the England fans and the Italian players. It was very, very different, yes, to say the least. Yes.
The fact that Italy have gone and won this, and the team ethic maybe that brought Italy through rather than the star power in that group compared to the star power that was in the French group, is there a lot of regret, even more so when you look at the fact that it was Italy and England in the final with the talent that was at the French disposal for this tournament?
Up to a point, I think, in the way this discussion started immediately after the elimination by the Swiss team, and people asked the right questions almost immediately. And I think everybody is aware of the fact that the teams that did best in this tournament were teams which put the collective valor of the squad beyond the qualities of individuals, and this doesn't just go for the Italian team, and I nearly said the England team because it's equally valid for the England team, but you could also say the same for Spain and for Switzerland and for Denmark. The teams that came out of these tournaments with the heads, up the highest, were all teams which, in a way, put the team effort or the collective effort above the individual prowess or talent of the players, and which is one thing that many people have commented upon in France. Obviously, the autopsy, if that's the word, is going to carry on for a while, and wondering why is it that France failed. The world champions were unable to keep a 2-goal advantage with 9 minutes to go on the clock, and so on and so forth. But by and large, I think the fact that this Italian team succeeded because of, again, I use this word a lot, I know, because of a collective project, is not something which has got unnoticed. And the fact that other teams which succeeded, and again, I put England in that, follow the same principle, is something which has been at the forefront of comment since the Euros ended. And I think rightly so. It probably is one of the interesting and probably quite one of the things that make me optimistic about the future of international football when you see that happen.
The COVID delay to the tournament means that the international calendar is a little bit out of sync. So we're only 18 months away from the World Cup, and the World Cup qualifiers have already started and will be back underway in 6 weeks' time. Didier Deschamps' future as coach, does that influence it, that actually now isn't the time for radical change, that actually a bit of consistency, a bit of continuation is what the best international sides need over the next 18 months? Was there any risk to his position at all after the defeat?
There is risk, and there was risk. I don't think there is any left. I mean, before the tournament started, it had been agreed that Didier Deschamps would carry the French team onto the 2022 World Cup, and perhaps beyond that. It's something which had been agreed by the French Federation and Didier Deschamps himself. He's still a world champion. He still brought the team to a final of Euro 2016. So, honestly, when you look at what he's done with the French national team, apart from this particular instance, it's been a great success. So I don't think there's much of a problem for him as far as his position is concerned. On the other hand, it's true that there's been a lot of talk about should we move to somebody else? And of course, a lot of talk has been about the fact that the coaches who have, inverted commas, failed, because failure is always relative in a cup competition, or of the big countries, that is, are coaches who have been in place for quite a long time. That's him, that's Joachim Löw, that's Santos. And obviously people will look at, they look at Southgate, they look at Mancini, and they see, managers who have been in charge of the national team for far shorter a time than he himself has been. I mean, it's 2012. That's a long time ago. And you could think, well, maybe, so just as we say that a club manager shouldn't outstay his welcome, and unless he wins all the time, 3 years is a maximum. Well, in terms of national teams, we're looking far, far beyond this 3-year term. And the question has been asked, but honestly, I do not expect anybody, Zinedine Zidane or anybody else, taking over from Didier Deschamps for the 2022 World Cup.
As well as the scenes outside of Wembley, what's dominated the last week has been the abuse that Marcus Rashford and Jadon Sancho and Bukayo Saka have taken online. And Bukayo Saka released a statement earlier today, and the most powerful line was saying, "I knew instantly the kind of hate that I was about to receive, and it's a sad reality that your powerful platforms are not doing enough to stop these messages," talking to the social media networks. I assume it's not a uniquely English problem. Kylian Mbappe, what was the reaction within France? Was there a similar fallout to him missing the penalty?
There were some absolutely appalling comments put on social platforms about Kylian Mbappe. Not necessarily about other players, but particularly about him. One of the reasons why that was the case is also the fact that he's a PSG player, and PSG is both the most liked and most despised team in France. So you've got to be aware of that. So there is an element of club loyalty, so to speak, about that. But I would say that perhaps the French public opinion and the French media are far less aware and need a little bit of education when it comes to that. Whereas in England, it became immediately a cause célèbre, I believe is the word or the expression to use. And people were aware of it immediately, and people are very sensitive to that. This sensitivity is not necessarily very well developed everywhere else, and certainly is not the case in France. If I can speak about my own reaction when Bukayo Saka missed his penalty, or rather Donnarumma saved it, I was watching it with English friends, and I said, I can bet you one thing, is that there will be an awful lot of people who notice, again, inverted commas, that it was Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho, and Bukayo Saka who missed their penalties, and you can guess what's going to come from that. I think that in England or in the UK, there is a greater awareness of this hatred. In France, it does exist. It can be just as nasty, but perhaps it's not given the same oxygen. And for that reason, the situations are quite difficult to compare. But yes, Mbappe got an awful lot of absolutely disgraceful, heinous comments after his penalty miss. And again, it depends which way you want to look at the mirror. If you want to look through it or you want to look at it. And at least in England, I believe people are confronting it. And I think in France, in some ways, people are forgetting it and don't really want to look at it at all. So it might be a good thing in some ways, because you don't want to give oxygen to the haters, which is one thing you do when you suddenly home in onto these racists who suddenly crowd their timelines with appalling insults. So it has been the case too in France, but not quite in the same context and to the same extent.
Yeah. One of the most interesting things I found ahead of the tournament, listening to you talk in the show, was when Karim Benzema would come up, and I never realised the reverence that Karim Benzema was held in within French football, and also among the French players. Like the way you were talking about the buzz that they were getting of Karim Benzema, the great Karim Benzema returning from Real Madrid. I just assumed he was another player in a squad full of superstars. He had a really good tournament. He obviously had some moments of absolute magic. He's 33 at this stage. Is this the end? Was it a quick return, or do you expect that actually Benzema will still be there for Qatar?
He will be there. I've got absolutely no doubt about that. I mean, he's wanted to go back into the French national team for a very long time. His performance, and not just on the field, I mean, he was at times absolutely magical, and he was as good for France as he had been for Real Madrid for a number of years. It's not just that, it's the way he integrated himself into the group, which was not an obvious thing to do, because there are tensions within this group. We shouldn't deny that. Not every single one of Benzema's teammates and member of Didier Deschamps' staff was particularly happy at seeing him coming back, because we have to remember why he actually left the team, or he was taken out of the team some 5 years ago. But he behaved absolutely impeccably. He made all the right efforts. I was going to say all the right noise, but that wouldn't be fair to him. He did much more than doing the right noise. He did the right thing. And on the field of play, he was, I would say, probably the best French player in this Euro. The most consistent. He had some problems to start with, but he grew into the tournament, and he, honestly, against what he did against Switzerland, we don't even talk about him as a player of the tournament, but believe me, I mean, the first goal he scored against Switzerland, I mean, as an individual goal, is one of the greatest moments, certainly footballing moments of the tournament. So, yes, I fully expect Karim Benzema to stay in the team and to be actually one of the leaders of that team, the French team, if they qualify for 2022.
Yeah, it is one of the weird quirks of tournament football that once a team is knocked out and you move on to the next stage, almost all the greatness of what they've achieved is forgotten about. And you think back to just how brilliant Pogba and Benzema were at times in that match. And then when it comes to those team of the tournaments, neither of them are found near it. All our football and off the ball is with thanks to Paddy Power Save Our Game. England racked up 11 goals at the Euro, so that means Paddy Power is donating 110,000 to Irish football. For information on responsible gambling, visit gamblingcare.ie. So for the next 4 weeks or so, it's going to be transfer gossip dominating the headlines, and French players, Kylian Mbappe, Raphael Varane will be dominating, but also French clubs, because there's been a collapse of one of the television deals in France, which means that, with the exception of Paris Saint-Germain, almost all the French clubs, including the new champions and what brilliant champions they were, Lille, almost all of those clubs are in pretty severe financial difficulty.
More than severe. It's I don't know where to start, really. I mean, it's a complete collapse, because we still don't know exactly what the situation is going to be for the new season. We know Amazon has moved in, as we were expecting them to do so. There are question marks about the other broadcasters. The amount of money which they're going to plow into the game in France, into the professional game in France, is going to be nowhere near what MediaPro was supposed to put in, which was about €1 billion euros a year.
So for a club like Lille, what does that mean per season?
Jesus. I mean, Lille is a basket case, as are many other clubs in France. Their finances, I mean, you talk about Lille, you could talk about Marseille, which is, really well supported, a huge fan base, massive potential, and the rest of it. You look at it, it's everywhere. Everybody's losing money, and I know it's not exclusive to Liga. It's the same in most, national championships and leagues across Europe. But in terms of France, the peculiar problem is that they thought that they had found, in a way, a solution to that by getting this massive TV deal that was 2 years ago. And then the deal completely crashed. And then suddenly, I mean, and the clubs, being football clubs, had been speculating, in a way, investing money, or rather spending money, investing is a polite term, which they didn't have, in the hope, or in some cases, the conviction that they would get this big share of the big cake. But what they're getting is a very small cake. It's like a souffle, which you've taken out of the oven a little bit too early, and it's gone down. Doesn't taste very nice, and there's far less of it to share around. So everybody's financial projections are being revised. So it's okay for PSG because UEFA has put financial fair play aside because of the pandemic. So it's okay because they can put in whatever money they want, which is why you see them actually being very active on the transfer market. For the others, it's more of a question that how can we get any money? Because what we're going to get from the broadcasters is far less than what we were expecting only 18 months ago. So therefore, no, it's an existential crisis. And I'm not exaggerating that when I use these words. Those clubs, perhaps in other financial contexts, wouldn't be able to operate. Honestly.
Right.
There is no money. And I mean, there is no money. There is not enough money coming from sponsors. There is not enough money coming from people going through turnstiles for obvious reasons. The money coming from broadcasting is nowhere near what people were hoping it would be. And because of that, we still have players under contract, and there's still a few clubs trying to do this and that and the other. And Marseille is investing some money. The case of Bordeaux is a crazy one, who have been taken over by Gérard Lopez. I will not say anything about it, but it is insane, really insane. And the whole economy of French football is wrong. And at some point, when you're heading towards the wall at 300 miles an hour, there's one point you're going to hit it, and it's not going to feel particularly nice. And I'm afraid that I can't see how I don't see where the brakes are. And people keep spending and, live from 1 second hand to mouth, basically 1 minute to the next. But there is no genuine solution, which is, available to these clubs, which are in peril for their own lives.
The Premier League clubs will be the vultures circling around the carcass here, but will the Premier League clubs, with the likes of Camavinga, who's been linked with Manchester United, Renato Sanchez has been linked with Liverpool, Houssam Aouar has been constantly, like every good player outside of Paris Saint-Germain, it seems, is in the papers. Is there enough money?
Doku as well, the Belgian, but winger, obviously from Rennes.
Is there enough money in the sale of those players to keep those clubs alive for the coming season?
I'm not too sure about that, because we're talking. We're talking about a small group of players here. And I know there are plenty of very, very fine players in French clubs, and French clubs might be an economic basket case, but there are many things about French clubs which is good. In terms of the training, the scouting, and so forth, they're still very good at what they do, and they give a chance to those young players. So there is this advantage that Ligue 1 has got, is that their clubs do trust young players more than other leagues. So because of that, it is attractive as well. But the players we're talking about, the Dokus and the Camavingas and so forth, there aren't that many of them, and also there aren't that many of them who will command the kind of price which can make a real genuine difference. The case of Lille, for example, if you're talking about Renato Sanchez, but you could talk about other players from Lille as well. This club has been surviving basically through selling its best assets for the last, that's at least since 2017, before that as well. Still, despite all of that, it's a club that has been hemorrhaging money because of its very peculiar economic arrangements, and it hasn't been able to find an even keel, even though it sold an awful lot of players, Nicolas Pepe, for example, amongst many others, for a lot of money. But even with that, they haven't been able to balance the books. And Lille was in the Champions League, and Lille was in European competitions. So imagine what it's like for clubs which are not. It's almost, there is only, the family silver, it's fine. You can sell it, but there's one moment when suddenly there is not much left on the shelf, and there is not much to extract from the mines that you've been digging in for a long time, and which everybody's aware of. So, a few players will sell for a lot of money. It might ease the situation of a few clubs here and there for a while, but it is not a solution.
It's interesting you mentioned financial fair play in Paris Saint-Germain. When you look at the wages that they must be paying around Gini Wijnaldum, Sergio Ramos, Gianluigi Donnarumma, and the signings of Hakimi and Danilo Pereira as well. Mbappe, I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about over the course of the summer. Rafael Varane, it looks almost certain he's going to leave Real Madrid, and maybe because he's not an attacking player, it doesn't gain as much headlines, and Manchester United supporters have got Jadon Sancho. Rafael Varane does feel as though he could be a transformational signing. Or am I thinking of a Rafael Varane of 3-4 years ago who was in the running to be the best centre half in the world? Is he not still at 28 one of those players with that sort of potential?
Yeah, completely. And he's, I think, the kind of central defender that Manchester United have been waiting for, and perhaps, I mean, since when? I'm trying to think back, but I think that they're hoping to find, if they can get Varane, thinking of the Maguire-Varane partnership as being the equivalent of the Village-Ferdinand, for example, partnership. He has got everything that a centre-back, top centre-back needs in terms of technique. His passing is superb. He's good in the air, physically strong. He's very calm, which is, his greatest quality. Was the first quality that every scout noticed in him. Even, when he was at Lens, and a very young man, he always had that about him. This kind of Rio Ferdinand, yes, calm, and when everybody's going crazy around him, he still had the head on his shoulders. He can make the right choice. He's a good tackler, but he doesn't need to tackle much, which is what you like in a central defender. And also, obviously, he's right-footed. So you've got Maguire on the left and Rafael Varane on the right. And that makes complete sense. And you've got Luke Shaw on the left as well. I mean, this is starting to look like a proper defense to me. And obviously, it's not saying, that Lindelof or Eric Bailly are bad defenders. It's that Varane is something else. And as well, it's the experience. When you think about Varane, you have to think about, he's only 28 years old, I believe. And when you look at what he's already won, he's been champion of Spain 3 times. He's won the Copa del Rey, of course. He's won 4 Champions League. He's won the Club World Cup. He's won the World Cup with the French national team. He's somebody who has experienced football at the highest level and as a member of a starting 11, an absolutely crucial part of the teams which won those titles. So you're also buying this experience, this calm, and this reputation. And also somebody who in the dressing room is very much appreciated, maybe not by Florentino Perez, because I don't know if there are any leaks about Florentino Perez talking about Rafael Varane yet, because he's talked about everybody else, Ronaldo, Del Bosque, he hasn't. I haven't heard anything about him and Rafael Varane, but he can really bring something more. I mean, he's one of the top defenders. He might not have exactly the best of tournaments with France. I mean, he looked fantastic at times, and there were games where he was put in more difficulty, but that was more of a collective thing than a personal thing, individual thing. But he could bring a huge amount to the club, and I think they're absolutely right to move in. I mean, it's the best time. He's only 28. He's only got 1 year on his contract, which means it's not going to be that crazily expensive. And if they can get him, well, they're starting to become a very, very serious proposition, I must say, in the Premier League.
Philippe, great to talk to you as always.
My pleasure.
Philippe Auclair there.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power's Save Our Game. England's goals totaled 110k for Irish football. Gamble responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power's Save Our Game. England's goals totaled 110k for Irish football. Gamble responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.
All right, Philippe Auclair coming up in a while, but John Giles is with us on this Thursday evening. Evening, John.
Evening, Nathan.
Turns out it wasn't coming home after all.
No, very disappointing in the end for English supporters anyway.
What went wrong then for England on Sunday night?
Well, I think the team selection was a big mistake, Nathan.
The switch to three at the back.
Three at the back, and well, actually he was playing with five at the back, because if you take the three central backs and that, so if you play five at the back, it means there's a player out somewhere. And I think when he did that, they were probably going to be outplayed in midfield anyway, Nathan, over the 90 minutes. I think they were. But if Trippier hadn't been picked and they just played the ordinary back four, then you could have put Grealish or Henderson in the middle of the field. So he missed out on a player, in my opinion, in a very, very important position by picking Trippier and four other... I know they were wing-backs, well, they're called wing-backs now, Trippier. But Trippier coming in, Nathan, in my opinion, could have missed out. They missed out on a midfield player, and I think that told on them in after the first 15 minutes.
Because I'm sure what Southgate would say and has said is that, well, it was those two wing-backs who linked up so brilliantly for their goal after 3 minutes.
Well, that's true. But there's another 87 minutes to play, Nathan.
Yeah.
You know, so, okay, that can happen and it can work in that way. And it did, and it was a very, very good goal. But after 15 minutes, once Italy got a grip of the game and the midfield play with Verratti and Jorginho and to a lesser extent Barella, they dominated the rest of the game. It's not 75 minutes. So, I mean, okay, you can say, yeah, it was a good goal with what he did, but in the long run, they didn't win the match through it. I think they lost the match through that situation.
Southgate had made a lot of changes during the tournament, so, you know, flipped full-backs after the first match onto the Scotland game, went with three at the back against Germany, because Germany, it felt, were going three at the back, and he sort of matched up against them. There was a lot of surprise even before the game when it emerged that he was going to go with, as you said, the two wing-backs and three centre-backs, because, as you said, they were giving up that midfield battle instantly. Was that a negative approach, a conservative approach, or was it an acceptance that, well, even with Saka in there, even with three in the middle, we don't have the technical talent in the players to dominate an Italian midfield, so let's let them have the ball, but let's be rock solid at the back?
No, it was a stupid decision, Nathan. It was just stupid. I mean, you can't let people have possession of the ball in the midfield and say, well, okay, we'll get away with it. I mean, the ball's the most important thing in the pitch, Nathan. And why give that to the opposition anyway if you can get the ball yourself? You know, once the midfield players got it, like Jorginho and these guys, they're really, really good on the ball, and they dominated the game. And you know, the idea of the pitch, or when you're playing in a team, is to dominate the ball, Nathan. I know what you're saying. Sometimes people don't; they sit back and then they hit people on the break and that. But they usually do that when they're regarded as the weaker team. Yeah. You know, well, England, like, would you look at the players that they have, and if you look at all around the team, you know, apart from the two midfield players, I think England had the stronger players. You know, they had a really, really strong panel. I mean, they suffered. They didn't have the really classy, creative midfield player, but there an awful lot of players around Phillips,
Rice,
and Rice in the middle of the field, Nathan. Now, when they were playing, you know, they had Jack Grealish and they had Saka. All they had to do was deliver the ball, and they could get on with it from there. But they had to get on the ball first, and after the first 50 minutes, I mean, Italy were really, really good and dominated the game after that, in my opinion, especially from the middle of the field.
The performance was consistent with a lot of what we saw from England during the tournament, maybe with the exception of the match against Ukraine, who they put 4 goals past. They were very conservative. He did seem to put a huge emphasis more on the defensive side than actually on trying to create something. Do you think a different manager, and God knows who that is because there doesn't seem to be the top managers crying out for an international job, but is there a lot more a different manager with a different, more positive style can get from that England group?
Well, I think they had enough in the what he had, Nathan, to get to the final, which he did quite comfortably.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back, the final. I mean, he just made outrageous decisions in the final. There's no doubt about that. And bringing I say with Trippier, he's missing a place in midfield, and then we got to the penalty situation which was a disaster for them. I think that is poor management. There's no doubt about that. Because if you look at Roberto Mancini, I mean, I don't think he had as good a players. Only in the middle of the field did he have as good a players as England had. But this fella's been unbeaten for 33 games, Nathan. So this fella's a real pro and doing what he did in this particular competition. I don't think he made the silly changes in the final in selecting the team that he did. It was a pretty a team that he's pretty hard for most of the other matches.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there was no change in the way he was turning his team out. If anybody was making changes for the opposition, it was Southgate.
And do you think playing Grealish, and is it just Grealish or does Saka or Henderson do the same? Do you think playing one of them and playing with 4 at the back and 3 in midfield and 3 attacking players gives England a bit more dominance of the ball?
Definitely, Nathan. First of all, it would have stopped their midfield players from playing as well as they did. They were outnumbered in the middle of the field. I mean, you had Rice and Phillips there, but they're very good at what they do, Nathan. But they're not as good as the midfield players, Varane and Jorginho. Especially about Jorginho now is playing better than he did for Chelsea, but that's by the way. But they were the type of players who were clever on the ball, short pass here, short pass there, getting it through. Very, very clever in dominating the game and being effective in what they were doing with their passing. Now, if England had Grealish in there or Henderson in there, they might have been able to put a stop to that. But Phillips and Rice were left on their own in the middle of the field, and they couldn't compete in the creativity that the Italians had with the players that I just mentioned. They were one short, Nathan, definitely one short in the middle of the field.
Right. They did get all the way to penalties, and you were a man who rarely, if ever, missed a penalty. What did you make of the players that he put forward for the shootout?
I couldn't believe it, Nathan, to be honest. I just could not believe that he could put lads in, young players like that, bring them on just before the end of the extra time, and to take penalties in a major competition. So I couldn't believe it.
Because there's 2 things there that you touched on. One is obviously Bukayo Saka at 19 with the 5th penalty, his first ever in senior football. The other, as you say, is actually bringing the players on just before the shootout. And I remember watching the game, and there was 2 minutes left. There was a throw in, and Italy took it quickly, and England couldn't make the substitutions. And there was a chance Italy might have just kept possession. The ball might not have gone out of play again, and England don't even get those players on the pitch, Rashford and Sancho. So you'd have to wonder how well thought out a plan it was that there was such risk that they mightn't even be on the pitch if they were of that importance in the first place.
Well, I can't make out what was happening. Normally before with a manager, when there's always a possibility that there's going to be a shootout. There's always that possibility. So that should be organised from last week. Right, who was going to take? Maybe it was, and maybe he decided last week this is what he was going to do. I wouldn't say it was a last-minute thing, but it was just odd that the players that he picked for such a vital situation were young lads and inexperienced lads, and again, just bringing them on. I mean, you have to warm up in a game.
Well, would you have felt comfortable coming on in a situation like that and your first touch of the ball being a penalty kick in a shootout of that importance?
Definitely not. I read in the paper afterwards, Nathan, that they have a coach there called Steve Holland.
Yeah, his assistant,
right?
Yeah.
Right, his assistant. And he kept in training, he kept a record of all the players' record in penalties in training, right? And then made a league table of the penalty takers. And the young players, apparently, were consistently better than the senior players. and therefore we're above the senior players in the table. Now, obviously, Southgate must have known about that and was influenced by it, in my opinion. Well, now, I can't think of any other reason, Nathan, that he would do what he did for the penalty shootout if it wasn't influenced by Steve Holland. Now, I don't know this, but I think these are the lads who've been consistently on top of the table for the penalties in training. Now, if that's the case,
it does seem to have been the case. It does seem that is what it was based on, because listen, England have such a horrible history with penalty shootouts down through the years. The question is always asked, have you practiced? And it seems that this was a response that actually they do at the end of every session have a penalty shootout. They try and apply some pressure on that, and then they look at that and I guess where players are shooting, have a bit of a table and make their decision based on what they have seen. Can you not practice your technique in training that you can stick with that technique when it comes to the actual shootout?
Well, first of all, Nathan, I think you believe that that's what happened. I believe that's what happened.
Yeah.
Now, that is total rubbish, Nathan. Not
Why?
you. I'm not talking about you, but the actual importance of training and penalty shots in training is relevant to the situation that these young players found them in at the weekend. When you're taking penalties in training, Nathan, first of all, you don't have the pressure of a big competition that we had, or even a senior match, where that's the thing that makes the difference to penalty takers, is keeping the confidence and their ability under pressure to do what's needed to be done. You don't take it from training, Nathan. I was in many training sessions and penalty practice when I played. And I've seen players that wouldn't score a penalty in a match in all their lives, whacking them home, clipping them with left foot, right foot, anywhere. This is a training session, Nathan. You can't practice what's needed to be done in the heat of the moment when you're playing in an important match or even a first-team match. It's a different game altogether. This is where the character comes into it. This is where you have to experience, mostly experienced players who've done it before. This is not easy, like in a training session, where it doesn't matter whether you score or you don't score. Where they've made a big mistake with this lad Holland is taking any real notice of the league and the young players doing better than the experienced players do. Of course you have to practice. I practice a lot taking penalties, but that's when I get on my own with a goalkeeper and do it on my own. But this wasn't a part of a training session, Nathan, where Paul Reaney, for example, wouldn't take a penalty in a million years. I've seen him whacking penalties home, but he wouldn't want to take a penalty on the big day.
Yeah.
And I think it was a huge mistake to do what they did. Like Sterling didn't take a penalty, right? Apparently, the goalkeeper
was sixth on the list. Yeah,
was sixth on the list, Nathan. Like, this is madness, absolute madness. And that's what I mean. Having a young player would taking the last penalty in a cup final, a European Cup final, and I think one or two of them had never taken a penalty before in a big match. Anyway, I just couldn't believe it, to be honest. I still can't believe that this happened.
So you don't think then, from when you think back to your own penalty practice, so you wouldn't go in on a Thursday, Friday and say, I'm going to put this bottom right-hand corner every penalty I take in practice because I know if I get one on Saturday, that's what I'm going to do. You don't think that would be beneficial?
Of course it would, Nathan. Yeah, because I was the penalty taker.
Yeah.
Right, and I was an experienced player. Of course it would. Actually, I didn't do it so much, practice that much during the week. But when we were playing at home, I used to ask David Harvey to come in on the day,
right?
And I'd practice what I was going to do that day, particularly, right? Which is the best time because it's in your mind and it's fresh in your mind of what you're going to do. And the big thing about that, in my opinion, taking penalties, I used to say to Dave Harvey, I'm going to put it to your left, right? Because when you're taking a penalty, there's a lot of psychological stuff in it, Nathan. And what I used to try and do for a penalty was that I'm going to put it to the left. If the goalkeeper goes to the left, right, I'm going to hit it hard enough to beat him. Because when you're taking a penalty, first of all, if you put it in one corner or the other, you've got a 50-50 chance that the goalkeeper will go the other way. So you've got a 50-50 chance. So when you're taking a penalty, you make sure you keep it also inside the goalpost, but hard enough if the goalkeeper goes that way. So you've made up your mind. Now you make up your mind either way. I would probably on the Friday would know what side I was going to put it on. On Saturday, particularly, we're playing at home. I'd go in and practice it at around 10:30 that morning. When you're playing away from home, you can't do it.
Yeah.
But I would certainly do a bit of practicing on the Friday. I wouldn't overdo it either, Nathan, to be quite honest. I wouldn't be taking like 15, 20 penalties. I'd be doing enough to know this is what I'm going to do, and I'm confident in doing it that way. But you have to be in the right frame of mind on the day to do it. That's the big thing. You know, you can practice it. There's nobody there. There's nobody in the crowd. It might be a big match. You're no score with a minute to go, and the pressure's really on. That's what you've got to take, and then you get experience from all of that. But these kids coming on in a European final, and they were taking a penalty at senior level before. At least one of them did that. Well, as I said before, I just don't believe it.
Well, I think you just have to see the stories that have come out since, that a lot of the senior players were a bit bemused that Saka was given the fifth one on. Even Marcus Rashford's statement, where his prolonged run-up he put down to the fact that he just wasn't maybe feeling 100%, and you're wondering, well, how did the management not see that he wasn't 100% if they're putting him on for that penalty kick?
Yeah, as you say, Nathan, there's always a possibility of a shootout. There's always a possibility. So that should be organised. Okay, they got there, but that could be organised a week, 2 weeks beforehand, in case you get there. Of course, then you pick at that stage. You pick your penalty takers and let them practice as much as they can. Now, I know they won't all play in the final, but if you got 7 of them, right, practicing every day. But you wouldn't have a league table, though, Nathan. You'd pick up the players, especially experienced players, right? And know this is like you're going to be taking the penalties. This is it. This is what you practice, and they should be mostly experienced players, Nathan. You know,
yeah.
Like you'd Sterling and Kane and Maguire played, and Stones played. You know, Sterling played. I mean, to be quite honest, you might let Rashford take one, but you'd keep these other kids a million miles away from it.
Yeah. Well, certainly cost them in the end. Looking back at the tournament as a whole, John, it was really entertaining. A lot of goals, a lot of great goals, a lot of close matches, extra time, plenty of drama. Did you enjoy it all? I did, Nathan. I think once it got past the early games in the prelims, and then later on there were some good games in that. I mean, Switzerland, France was brilliant. You know, Croatia, Spain. There were quite a few actually. Were very, very, very good. I thought overall the tournament was excellent. Yeah, and Italy worthy champions? I think so. I think they went through unbeaten. Nathan, don't think anybody beat them in the. They were very impressive in the group stage. Yeah. I think there was really, really good management from Mancini, because he didn't really have an out-and-out goal scorer. Chiesi, I think, came into the team. He wasn't in there originally. I think scored more goals than anybody else. Yeah. But they didn't have a Sterling or a Harry Kane in their lineups at all. And I mean, what they did. I mean, midfield they were very, very good. I mean, Jorginho playing. I think he played a lot better for Italy than I've seen him play for Chelsea. And also from the manager's point of view, like going back on the tradition of Italian football. And on international teams or football generally in Italy, in my time in that, like if the Italian team scored after a minute, they'd be defended for 89 minutes. This didn't happen with Mancini. You know, they were pressing up the pitch. If they scored a goal, they were going again, and they had great defenders as well, Nathan. But there was a change definitely in the way that they played from the tradition as we've known it. Yeah. John, you're going to stick with us for the summer, I think. We'll chat again next Thursday. We might do a little bit of nostalgia as well over the next few weeks. I know people loved it last year.
Yeah, we'll do that, Nathan. You tell me what you want. You're the boss.
We'll put it out. We'll put it out to the listeners. What do you want John Giles to talk about over the next few weeks? It won't be long till the new season starts again. But great stuff as always, John.
Thanks, Nathan. Speak to you then.
John Giles there, and if you want to get John Giles every week, just download the OTB Sports app and subscribe to our football podcast, and you'll get everything that we do, including Philippe Auclair. He's coming up next.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power's Save Our Game. Is your bookie giving you jack? Then you haven't tried Paddy Power. Gamble responsibly. GamblingCare.ie.